It's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and we explore a topic that is near and dear to my heart. My late grandfather was a World War II veteran, and I always wished I knew more about what he lived through during that frightening time. On a recent trip to the Philippines, my mother uncovered pieces of his life as a young Filipino soldier, giving me and my family a deeper understanding of how brave he and many others were as they fought for not only their country, but ours.
Hey, Mom. Hi.
I meet up with my mother to do something years overdue. It centers around this old briefcase that has been sitting in my family's home in the Philippines for decades. And yet, we've never opened it. Inside, something I've been searching for, a better understanding of my grandfather. That's him and my grandmother, with my mother Ellen on her wedding day. That's my mom today with her siblings as they uncover clues about their father, Jaime Barria, hidden away since before they were born. He never talked about it, but these photos and documents paint a picture of a frightening time. My grandfather was a World War II hero. What was going through your mind when you guys found it?
We were living with somebody who wasn't just a father, who wasn't just a husband, who wasn't just a brother, but much, much more than that.
She believes he had his reasons for not sharing his experiences with his children.
He wanted to protect us from the realities of war. To your service as a Philippine Scout.
With each piece, we get a clearer picture of what my grandfather lived through when his country was invaded by Japan. We learn that he was a member of the U.S. military's 45th Infantry Regiment, known as the Philippine Scouts, part of General Douglas MacArthur's forces who fought America's first battle of the war. Together, we are discovering not only about my grandfather's life, private first class, but the importance of the unit he was in, arguably the best prepared U.S. Army division at the start of the war. My grandfather grew up in a town called Imus, Cavite.
His family was in the agriculture business. I wouldn't say he got tired of being part of that, but he wanted to learn more and something else outside the horizon where he was.
He and I shared many moments together. That's him on the right, and I'm in the red dress. But never did he talk about the war and all of its atrocities.
It was difficult, extremely difficult on him.
While there were many tragic moments in the Philippines during the war, none worse than the Bataan Death March. Nearly 75,000 starving Allied prisoners were forced to march through a merciless 65-mile stretch. They were beaten, shot, even beheaded at the hands of the Japanese.
General Douglas MacArthur has returned.
Allied forces finally liberated the island nation in July of 1945. But not before Manila was in ruins and over 1 million people in this tiny country were dead. My grandfather was one of the lucky ones, but likely still dealt with the lingering trauma of war for the rest of his life. While this chapter is forever etched in Filipino history, through the lens of American history, this story has vanished. And the contributions of so many Filipino fighters, like my grandfather, have been completely forgotten. That's why this letter we found is so important.
From the White House?
It's from President Harry Truman to my grandfather and other Filipino fighters, thanking them for bravely fighting for the United States of America. In my next story, an effort to put this chapter into American history books. I'll introduce you to a special graphic novel leading that charge to tell the story of the contributions of the brave Filipino World War II fighters. As we continue our celebration of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, I shine a light on a story that's been largely omitted from U.S. history books, yet is so important to who we are as a nation. In the Shadow of Giants is a graphic novel that illustrates the powerful story of the Filipino World War II fighters, including women, and how their courageous sacrifice helped win the war for the United States.
If we don't understand the complexities of history, as they say, we're doomed to repeat them.
In The Shadow of Giants, author Matthew Fisher shares his efforts of bringing a crucial yet forgotten part of history back to light.
Pearl Harbor occurs, and as many Americans don't know, Manila was bombed the very next day. I mean, the Philippines were brought into the war at the same time that the rest of the U.S. was.
Manila, December 1941.
It's a year more than 260,000 Filipino soldiers bravely responded to President Roosevelt's call to arms to fight under the U.S. flag during World War II.
It has fallen very much out of what our knowledge of American history in World War II.
In his novel, Fisher takes inspiration from the oral histories gathered of real-life Filipino fighters, creating a compelling story about a courageous Filipina guerrilla fighter. Yes, a woman named Felipa.
She and her family have to escape to the villages, as many people did, and in doing so, she's forced into hiding and joins the guerrillas.
Fisher worked alongside Aria Villafranca, the novel's lead illustrator, to ensure the story would not only be authentic,
I wanted to make sure that they looked Filipino.
but that the characters would have the true likeness of a real-life Filipina fighter.
The inspiration for Felipa's hair, which for me was a very fun part, it was inspired by photos of a historical female guerrilla fighter named Commander WWII, and she has these big curls.
This is Commander WWII, and you can see the likeness, especially in the hair. She was such a courageous leader that they called her the Joan of Arc of the Philippines.
As many grandparents don't do, they don't talk about their experiences during the war.
Fisher tells me one of the characteristics of Felipa in the graphic novel that rings true to me personally is how Felipa never talked about her heroics. Just as my grandfather, who also fought in the war, never talked about his experience. This is him?
This is him.
With my mother Ellen, we discovered documents revealing he was part of the U.S. Army's Philippine Scouts.
We lived with somebody who was brave, who was devoted and loyal to his country and to the United States of America.
After reading In the Shadow of Giants, I think of the wartime turmoil my grandfather and so many others must have suffered. And yet, so few Americans have ever heard about their incredible sacrifice.
American history is often told in a way that glorifies our better actions. We see America as being the victors, the saviors. What happened in the Philippines doesn't fit into that narrative.
And in the final part of this series, the efforts made in Washington to help recognize and honor these brave men and women. Plus, we hear from some real-life Filipino World War II veterans. Many thanks to Night Kitchen Interactive and PhilVet Rep for helping to tell this story. To learn more, head over to dutytocountry.org or my story on fox44news.com. As we wrap up Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, the final chapter of my story as we hear from one real-life Filipino World War II veteran. Plus, why one group of advocates is waging a battle for all of them.
Old soldiers never die. They just fade away.
This adorable man, Celestino Almeida, was once a tough young Filipino fighter who bravely defended the United States in World War II against powerful Japanese forces. And he's still fighting, making sure people remember what he and so many other Filipinos did for our country. Thankfully, their stories have been preserved in this oral history library, dutytocountry.org, a goldmine of personal accounts from these Filipino heroes.
Subject, surrender.
Few Americans know that U.S. forces abandoned the Philippines for 2 years, leaving these fighters to fend for themselves. My late grandfather was one of them, a U.S. Army Philippine Scout.
Jaime Barria.
My mother and I recently found this, his cherished letter from President Truman, thanking him for his service. But not long after this letter, Washington turned its back on these heroes.
In 1946, they had the culmination of the Rescission Act, which was signed into law by the Congress. It just stripped away benefits of some 260,000 Filipino veterans who served during World War II.
Marie Blanco is a former chief of staff to Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii, who fought on behalf of these vets.
They were entitled to benefits, just like a regular veteran, and it was all repealed, and they got nothing.
Activist John Malagrito shares this staggering fact.
Out of the 66 allied countries, only the Philippines, only Filipinos were selectively denied.
This unjust denial left many to live out their lives in poverty.
Filipinos were treated as little brown brothers for the longest time, which meant that they were not given the kind of honor and respect and recognition that they deserve.
Retired U.S. Army Major General Tony Taguba made it his mission to make that happen.
17 months of going to Congress. We had 20 minutes to tell them where the heck's the Philippines, why the Philippines, why Filipinos fought for the United States, and we averaged 20 minutes. It's like a history lesson.
A partial victory came in 2017. They were recognized as United States veterans and awarded the Congressional Gold Medal.
This is a Congressional Gold Medal.
So that's their legacy, a symbol of their badge of honor.
But while this medal is important, it does not repeal the Rescission Act.
It means that this dark chapter in U.S. history will continue to haunt them, will continue to be a black stain in American history.
As that fight continues, they'll have to do it without Almeida, like so many other fighters he has passed, or in his words, faded away. But his story will live on in this library, leaving it now up to us to teach the legacy of these brave Filipino fighters.
My body may have been gone with the winds, but my soul remains in your heart and mind.
And with the help of the Filipino Veterans Recognition and Education Project, this story is now being shared in 7 states and 22 schools across the country to help educate all Americans about these brave Filipino World War II heroes. Hear their oral histories and access educational tools on dutytocountry.org.